Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my honor to talk to you today in this Good Reputation Conference, which is a global one that brings researchers from different disciplines all together in one gathering. As a keynote speaker, I would like to talk to you today about variationist sociolinguistics, language variation, and change. The outline of my presentation is as follows. I would like to introduce you to the variationist sociolinguistics, speech community, linguistic variables, social variables, and methodology and obstacles. Sociolinguistics as a broad term is concerned with studying the interrelation between language, culture, and society, focusing on the effect of society on language or dialect change. Sociolinguistics has been defined as the interdisciplinary science which is concerned with relationships between language and society. It is the study of the way language varies and changes in communities of speakers and concentrates in particular on the interaction of social factors such as age, education, sex, ethnicity, regional distribution of different speech communities. Now, the original terms of sociolinguistics are variationist sociolinguistics, which has roots in language and dialect change, traditional dialectology, in addition to other sub-disciplines of sociolinguistics. The key figures in sociolinguistics are William Labov in his study on the change in Martha's Vineyard, Peter Turgill, who has a good contribution in the European as well as the American sociolinguistics, Leslie Milroy, who is pioneering the social network analysis, the social network and language, and Penelope Eckert, who is concerned and talked about communities of practice. Now, what is sociolinguistics and in what way it differs from dialectology? As Oren Haskins, 1996, highlight the need to consider convergence in dialects, including European ones, and standard varieties talked in Europe as well as other parts of the world. They argue that accommodation is the main factor that results from sociolinguistic developments in these areas, and they claim that it justifies future cross-linguistic research in these areas. According to them, the first reason why regional dialect convergence is not given considerable attention is that standardization is a recent concept. The second is the paucity of educational opportunities before the 20th century. And the third reason is the high levels of external migration in Europe from different areas in Europe as well as other parts of the world. Most considerably is that traditional dialectologists were interested only in those individuals maintaining localized dialects and not in those who showed innovative language use as it is happening with sociolinguistics. The shift from traditional dialectology to modern-day variationist sociolinguistics brought such issues to the forefront of linguistic investigation. For example, dialect convergence in Europe is viewed to be an outcome of one of three social factors. These are influence of standard language, level of education, and spatial mobility. On the other hand, language or dialect change as a basic element or key concept in sociolinguistics is viewed as language as that change which has two-dimensional process. Some researchers state that on the vertical line, the standard language can have downward convergence or divergence by becoming linguistically more similar to the non-standard varieties and results in a decline of status of the standard language and the emergence of regional standards. To explain this mechanism, they use examples from English, such as the emergence of Australian standards. This form of change is what Britain 2009 terms as innovation diffusion, which implies the emergence of new features far away from the leveled and diffusing dialects rather than leveling, where the resulting variety still processes pre-existing features. This tends to be due to the expectation that out-group contact appears more than in-group contact according to Britain, and we use the term contact as it is the main factor that determines direction of influence and, for example, rural versus urban locations or city centers focus on dialect maintenance, focus on mapping highly localized peripheral forms, as well as sociolinguistics. Now, one of the main factors or key concepts in sociolinguistics is what is called the speech community. It is defined as a group of speakers who share the same norms or expectations with regard to their language use. Of course, when a speech community comes into contact with another speech community, one will acquire others' lifestyles, including the language variety they use. The speech community is not defined by any marked agreement in the use of language elements, so much as by participation in a set of shared norms. Such norms may be observed in overt types of evaluative behavior and by the uniformity of abstract patterns of variation which are invariant in respect to particular levels of usage, as it is stated by Lebov 1972. Now, we'd like to talk about traditional dialectology before going on talking about linguistic variables and non-linguistic, social variables. In terms of traditional dialectology, it has been mentioned that all of the three types of migration play an effective role in complicating the map of traditional dialectology. In some studies, researchers have tried to address these issues, pointing out some of the dialectological and sociolinguistic researches by merging the insights available from previous works in dialectology and variationist sociolinguistics into researchers' analysis from the early stages. The analysis they presented followed recent methods in quantitative analysis, as pioneered and developed by scholars in the field such as Lebov and Prudgel, without, of course, ignoring the fact that the communities and dialects under investigation have their own attributes. At the same time, researchers had hoped that by presenting their analysis with the framework of a modern quantitative sociolinguistic model, the data presented can be used to benefit theoretical and support theoretical formulations in languages under investigation, as well as general sociolinguistics. Now, The main material of sociolinguistic and dialectological research is what is called the linguistic variable, which is depending on non-linguistic variables such as the ones we had already talked about, meaning age, sex, education, etc. Any linguistic variable is at the heart of variationist sociolinguistics, and without linguistic variables, sociolinguists will have a type of difficulty in um, categorizing the direction and type of influence. A linguistic variable is that feature that has at least two variants in order to know which is the new one and which is the direction of influence in terms of the linguistic variable. There seems to be several kinds of linguistic variables: lexical, grammatical, phonological, syntactic, and these are all related to the language variety and investigation. The linguistic variables allow researchers to quantify language use, and because quantification is that crucial element in sociolinguistics, this has type of interest to sociolinguists. In order to determine the type of change and variation, researchers need to work on social, meaning independent variables. They study the impact of various social variables on language variation and change, known as the correlation between dependent and independent variables. Common variables would include any social or socioeconomic feature that is owned by the speech community under investigation. In terms of the methodology followed by sociolinguistic studies or variationist dialectologists and sociolinguistics is, for example, the speech community to be selected. Let us consider the case of H dropping in two communities. Of course, they are English-speaking communities, one middle class and one working class. And for example, in the UK city Leeds, the problems that we would expect is how can we overcome these problems, for example, when dealing with people belonging to different speech communities. Therefore, one of the problems that is facing sociolinguistic researchers is recruiting a representative sample of informants, which means that to what extent these informants can be found, can be recruited, and in addition to elicitation of natural speech. Why is it this difficult or so difficult? Because eliciting natural speech is not an easy task because we are working with people, and this type of difficulty would offense the researchers when they elicit or collect the data they need. Obtaining a sufficient number of tokens. A token is the type of variant. Having a means of exploring language variation effectively. Sociolinguistic studies include different branches or different forms. The first one is quantitative sociolinguistics, pioneered by Lebov. Social network analysis, led by Milroy. Community of practice, pioneered by Penelope Eckert. Most linguists agree that language cannot be separated from society, and for this reason, little can be gained from a purely quantitative analysis. Triangulation approach, meaning quantitative, qualitative, and ethnographic methods is the best model to be followed in sociolinguistic research. Informants. Without informants, researchers cannot do any field work or sociolinguistic research, because they will need informants to get the linguistic variables from, as well as eliciting or knowing about their social lifestyles. As we had already mentioned, data collection is not an easy task for sociolinguistic researchers. In order to have natural language variety, in most times we will be working on vernaculars. These are the language varieties spoken in everyday lives. We would need to write questionnaires and structured interviews. We need to talk about informal unstructured interview, which is known as a sociolinguistic interview. Now, let me talk to you about three key figures or leading figures in sociolinguistics. The first is William Labov, who had a pioneering efforts in. Sorry, I'm just going over the slides. Okay. When talking about, for example, Peter Trudgill, in the course of his intense research activity on English dialect variation and change, Peter Trudgill contributed significantly to examining some major issues related to the contact-induced decrease of linguistic similarities between mutually related dialects. His book, Dialects in Contact, is an investigation of dialect leveling within a contact framework, and is basically concerned with contact between two or more mutually intelligible or related dialects. Another figure in sociolinguistic research is Leslie Milroy, who is the pioneering figure of social network analysis. One of the first attempts to explore the social network theory was Milroy's 1980 sociolinguistic study in Belfast. In this study, Milroy adopted social network as an approach to investigate the social relations of individuals as a means to collect information and data that can help to understand the linguistic behavior of individuals, representing groups, of course, groups of speakers. She found that the linguistic behavior of individuals should not be accounted for in terms of differentiation in their social class membership, but rather in terms of social network integration. Another theory of sociolinguistics is the communities of practice pioneered by Penelope Eckert. A more recent approach is this one, which is the study of language variation and change in the community of practice approach, which is mainly pioneered by Eckert in her book in 1980, and is referred to as the third wave approach. Central to this approach is the notion of the linguistic market, which emphasizes the relation between variation and the production of a self in a symbolic economy. And this constitutes the source of forms other than the global standard and the vernacular. As Eckert claims, This approach differs from the first and second waves studies in that it focuses on agency rather than structure. However, this does not ignore the significance of structure, but rather it emphasizes the role of structure in constraining practice. When talking about data collection, the sociolinguistic interview tends to be the most commonly used method of data collection, with variationist sociolinguistic research, followed by different pioneering researches, and it is considered a vital tool in the variationist sociolinguistic framework, as Schilling 2013 emphasizes. The sociolinguistic interview is typically a one-to-one exchange between the researcher and the informant. Now, one of the basic problematic cases in sociolinguistic fieldwork and data collection is what is called the observer's paradox, which is critical to empirical fieldwork. The problem of the observer's paradox is the critical case to empirical fieldwork. This is defined as the double bind that researchers face when they are interested in discovering how people behave without being observed. But the only way of doing that is to observe them. Speakers tend to shift away from their causal variety when they are observed by a stranger and maybe a tape recorder. Some researchers have already drawn attention to this problem as a serious effect on obtaining a vernacular that is selected by researchers. For example, Milroy in her 1920 study used an approach which is a hybrid of insider and outsider investigators. She did not work as a researcher, but as a friend of friend, just to reduce the effect of observer's paradox. Of course, sociolinguistics is a very wide discipline. It needs hours of speech, but I would stop talking about sociolinguistic studies for the time shortage. And as you know, nowadays we are doing the presentations online and virtual. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to I hope that all researchers would have good participation, and I hope to talk to you again. Thank you for watching and for listening.